to not be afraid of maybe yesterday's automation sins that may have happened by others. Everyone's journey can be challenging when they're trying to automate and trying to launch more manufacturing in the U.S. Everybody back in the day had some sort of a horror story. You hear of robots that turned into clothes racks and things like that, similar to the exercise equipment in your house.
It's rare to find an automation company that seemingly does it all. SCADA, robotics, panel shop, drive systems, you name it. But Premier Automation is a company that's doing just that. We're going to sit down with their president, Mike Gunniers, to hear how they've been making an impact in the manufacturing industry in Pittsburgh and beyond for decades, and how they're helping the next generation of small to mid-sized manufacturers thrive. Mike, good to be sitting down with you here and getting to see this company that you've built up in so many fascinating ways here today. But if we weren't hanging out here at Premier Automation, where in Pittsburgh might we be having a drink? Let's start this off manufacturing happy hour style.
Yeah, there's a ton of really good places, but I'm thinking, to be local here, we'll go North Park Lounge.
Okay.
So,
what's the North Park Lounge? Describe it in a couple sentences for.
Yeah, it's just they have a few locations, but it's just more of a casual bar where, they have good food, good alcohol, and just a nice vibe.
Well, I think this is an appropriate question to start off a discussion over a drink at the North Park Lounge. You've said Premier is basically 4 companies in one. You've got a robotics group, your automation and SCADA group, a drive systems group, and contract manufacturing panel shop, all under one roof. But there's something else that you said when I first talked to you, in that it's always been about the industry. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, mostly what I mean is it's about manufacturing. Really it's about, it's always been a passion to try to return manufacturing to the United States. Early in my career, spent a lot of time moving steel mills from the United States to places like China, Indonesia, Korea, and really just knew that wasn't right, and had an opportunity to come back and help local manufacturing grow. And so really that's been the passion, is to try to, make it a better place for the next generation.
Yeah. We're going to dig into what you just said there in a second, because, I've been out on your shop floor today. I've seen one of the robotic cells you've been working on recently. But I do want to ask a little bit about the business first. Because you are so diversified, would you say there's a common thread throughout your business?
It's always been about solutions, whatever the customer needs. Trying to always not define the line of this is what we do, but it's like, hey, what do you need, Mr. Customer, to be successful? And that's kind of why we've ended up with the team we have.
One of the things that you had just mentioned was that, you're passionate about returning manufacturing to the U.S. because you've been in this industry long enough to see when it was going the opposite direction. And I think a lot of manufacturers that are listening to this across the country and beyond very likely feel the same sentiment. Like, what advice would you give to other manufacturers in terms of how they can lead businesses that, they have their core business, but they're probably diversified as well, because they're interested in also helping the folks in industry? What advice would you give to them to be successful?
To not be afraid of maybe yesterday's automation sins that may have happened by others. Everyone's journey can be challenging when they're trying to automate and trying to launch more manufacturing in the U.S. A few years ago, the technology that was, whether it was in robotics or in automation, was difficult, challenging, couldn't do a lot. But today, there's so much advancements, especially in the last 5 years, that a lot of applications that were really, were very difficult, just really aren't that way now. Now they can be solved easily. The tools are so much better. The reliability of all the equipment. It's just similar to the automotive. It wasn't 20 years ago, 30 years ago that, when you went to start your car, you weren't sure it was going to turn on. You could get a flat tire and that was pretty common stuff. Today, they auto start and stop at traffic lights. And it's become that reliable. So it's the same way in the automation and technology. But everybody back in the day had some sort of a horror story. Hear of robots that turned into clothes racks and things like that. Similar to the exercise equipment in your house. So.
Well, I like that you went that direction with that answer, not to be intimidated by the sins of the past when automation did not have the same ease of use,
right,
if you will, to simplify where we could go with that. One of the things that struck me about your shop floor when I was looking at that earlier was there was an automated screw driving system on the shop floor. And it wasn't going to like a big automotive manufacturer. It was going to a small manufacturer here in the area. Are you seeing more small, medium-sized businesses adopt robotics? Is that rate increasing? I'm interested to get your general sense, and then I'll go into a couple more details from there.
Yeah, I think everyone realizes they have to do it today. So it's even if they were, very similar in COVID when we all started to get on Zoom and Teams, there was nobody seemed to be using that. It was pretty rare that you were on a call, had to be some sort of now it's just commonplace. So I think, on the other side of that with the workforce that we can see, a lot of people retired, disappeared from the workforce. People realize that they can't find people to do the job, so they're no longer are they afraid to add automation and robotics to their factories. They're welcoming it and actually pushing for it.
Yeah. How do you help folks like that go from concept to completion? From an idea on a blank piece of paper into something real that is making an impact on their operation. How do you help groups, particularly that may have never automated before? Can you take us through that process a little bit?
Yeah, it's a lot of it's conversation. I think in a lot of technology companies will call it whiteboarding sessions or something. Because we're more boots on the ground, brute force kind of guys. We tend to just have a conversation. You start with that. Where are we trying to go? How many pieces, parts are we making? What's kind of whatever, try to get their, where do they think they want to go? What do they need today? What do they think they'll need tomorrow? And then we try to, find a solution that works best for them, and obviously budgets, how much, what's the return on the investment, obviously what makes the most sense for them.
I think that's a great point you bring up there about budget, because a company that's automating for the first time, small to medium-sized manufacturer, doesn't have necessarily the same capital allocation.
Yeah.
But besides that, there's also that element of the risk feels a lot bigger because, going from 0 to 1, it's like if we invest in this, it's got to work. It's not like, we can turn it into a coat rack. That could be the end of the business right there.
Yeah.
How do you help folks through that part of the process?
Yeah, so it's, just trying to figure out exactly, how do we de-risk the project? And there are government programs out there to help people de-risk some of these. And so sometimes it may be getting them in contact with those folks. Or we try to bring things in to try to, proof of concept, or how can we, try to make sure that it, makes sense for them.
Yeah. Do you have any good stories about that really kind of illustrate this? I feel like that automated screw driving machine is like a perfect example of this. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that came to fruition?
That one I really don't know.
Okay.
But, but some of our automation equipment, like our CNC bus bender, we just like everyone else that when you start out, we were bending them by hand. We had a hydraulic bender, but trying to get very precise angles, and you're trying to make repeat pieces with certain lengths, and so it's you start to do a cost analysis on that. We're like, okay, well, how much bus work do we use? How much scrap or do we have? How long does it take? How much time will we save? And so you try to do that time study cost analysis, and once you have that, then it's, then it makes sense to spend whatever amount of money that it is for that. So
yeah, one question to go beyond this a little bit, when you are going from concept to completion, helping scope out these projects, what role do partnerships like with Mosba play into this when it comes to adopting new technology, finding new business opportunities? Can you share a bit about that?
Yeah, it's a crucial piece of it, and that is, so obviously if whether we find the opportunity or whether CED finds the opportunity, we work on it together to see what technologies make the most sense. Obviously, pricing becomes a key part of that. Is there a large volume opportunity? Who might be the competitor, or what would be the best solution for that customer? So it's a give and take relationship where we have to work together and follow up. There's often technical information. Sometimes we may have that information on the process. Maybe it's our partners at CED. They may have that information, or maybe there's some technology transfer of whether it's some piece of hardware or even software, whatever that might be.
How do you coach folks along that are new to automation, that know what it needs to do, how it needs to work, but don't necessarily know like the Rockwells or the Linmots of the world? How do you match like customer specifications or lack thereof with the tech that's out there?
Yeah, that's a challenge, right? I don't know that anybody has that magic bullet there, but it's you just put one foot in front of the other, I would say. You start with some basic training. We tend to pair, newer, younger people with a more seasoned, giving them like a mentor and trying to make sure that that knowledge transfer happens. And then when we do our projects, we have a large entertainment partner in Florida that we work with, and and they have a process on their projects where they do staged reviews. And so we do a 0% review, meaning we get an order, we get a project, we want to make sure everybody is on the same page, including if we have a new engineer on that, making sure they know their next steps. And then we do a 30%, 60, 90% reviews, and just to make sure that we don't have any missteps. So there's managers involved, there's other departments involved, and we just try to make sure that we match what we're doing to the customer's needs and requirements.
Another business question I have, this is actually going to go a totally different direction, but something I can't help but notice everywhere I am around here. Panelshop.com. How do you, of all people, get a website like panelshop.com? Did you just have foresight back in the year 2000? We should probably grab that. It might be really valuable later. I'm very curious about this unique business angle of what you do.
Yeah. So obviously it's not earth-shattering. Hey, obviously everyone knows in our business across the United States that anywhere you get control panels manufactured is called a panel shop, right? So it is the best name, no doubt. But the backstory is back in 2008, got a huge honor, won Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year, and was just a tremendous experience. But I got to go to Palm Springs in California, and spent time meeting people like Jay Leno and others. And we lost on nationals, of course, but what it taught us was what an entrepreneur looks like. And really it was okay, we need to figure out what's the next step. And it was just hey, how about an online version of our contract manufacturing, and was panelshop.com. Found out it was somebody in California or Canada that owned it, and negotiated a price, $500, and
wow,
bought that.
What a bargain!
I know, yeah.
In
it was
retrospect,
great.
for sure. I'm curious. Does just having the most perfect basic website title you could have for one of your core businesses, does that result in business you probably otherwise wouldn't have gotten just because someone looks it up, they're like, oh, panelshop.com, that looks like what I need.
Absolutely. And it really mattered for many years for SEO, having that name. But I don't think it's as important, but we're still, number one, we would come up, we don't have to pay the AdWords. And so if you're looking for a panel shop, you're going to find us usually on the first page.
Has this always been like an aspect of Premier Automation? You're just finding little ways to be ahead of your time, do things differently? Because just seeing the type of company that's built out here today, I don't see that in many other spots. And to just have the processes and to be able to balance process with entrepreneurship here is something that I don't see many other spots. Has this always just been part of your DNA?
Yes, I think it has been, but realizing that we're an innovation company, we're always helping our customers innovate and trying to find the best solution for them. So you just have that in your culture and your mindset. So I think it was early on that we realized, hey, we need to try to do the same thing for ourselves. Mm-hmm. If we're going to do something, let's try to make sure we innovate and we try to automate ourselves.
Do you think there's something unique about the regional Pittsburgh manufacturing community, the industrial scene, the automation scene here that's influenced how you've grown and maybe just some of your mentality in general?